help on it.
Think about that. We'll come back after the break. This is Kim Hammer. You're listening to the Kim Hammer Show. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Kim Hammer Show. This is Kim Hammer, the host. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. A quick shout out to my sponsors, which would be Everett Buick GMC down in Saline County for a good new vehicle or for a certified pre-owned vehicle that has been checked out, ready to go. You can drive off the lot with confidence. A great place to go, as well as all their service department. And then Baxley, Penfield, Mounty Real Estate here in Central Arkansas. Take care of all your real estate needs. And when I say all your real estate needs, I mean all your real estate needs, whether you're residential or commercial. They'll take really good care of you. They've got great customer service. Also, Edwards Food Stores here in Central Arkansas, also over in East Arkansas. Stores are always great, clean. They do a great job as far as dealing with, social distancing and all the things that we're trying to be team players about as we deal with the COVID-19 epidemic. They're well-stocked, and their prices are very competitive, so I'd encourage you to shop Edwards Food Store. All right, next week I want to mention, too, because it is a show I don't think you're going to want to miss. Next week, I'm going to have Minnesota Senator Dr. Jensen. He's been in the news a little bit. He has taken an opposite position other than some of those in the medical field, which has resulted in him getting called before the Minnesota Medical Board for his comments that he has made. He has agreed to be on the show, and we'll have him on next Saturday. I'll dedicate the whole show to him, and so make plans now to share that with your friends, and I think it'll be an interesting show to come back on. So, Dr. Dillaha, let me pick up where we left off, and then we're going to bring Dr. Spann into the conversation. How realistic is it that for as much information you have to collect on people that you're going to be able to go that deep and expect people to stay home, even though the letter that you send to them is a pretty sternly written letter? How realistic is it that it's going to happen, or are we just spending a whole lot of energy for nothing?
Well, my hope is that the vast majority of people will do that, because that's going to be a really important strategy for us in Arkansas to break the chain of transmission. We have got to isolate when we have the illness, and when we've been exposed, we really need to quarantine.
Okay. I did want to ask you a question about the tracers. Are these all employed by the Department of Health and by the two contractors, or do you have volunteers that are doing it?
We have some organizations that have staff that are helping us. It includes Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Central Arkansas Library System, UALR School of Social Work. So they have people in their system that are part of their employees that have been trained as contact tracers, and they are assisting us.
I'll tell you what, dude. Let's bring Dr. Spann into the conversation. Dr. Spann, good to have you on the Kim Hammer Show this afternoon. Thank you for taking time to come back on. There was a few things I wanted to visit with you. We ran out of time last week.
Yeah. Hey, Kim, how you doing? Dr. Dillaha, good to hear from you again, and good to talk to you.
Well, thank you for being here with me.
All right. So let me, we got about 20 minutes, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring Dr. Spann into the conversation, one, we didn't get to finish last week, and Dr. Dillaha, you represent the health department. Dr. Spann is out in the field working. One of the things that I hear, people saying, because we keep getting these directives passed down from the governor, and I know that the health department is an active participant in giving the governor information that he's making the directives and the orders from. So y'all are, kind of joined at the hip. But one thing that is struggling with people out there, people are struggling with, is we've got to see a pathway forward to where we can live life and we can have the hope of knowing that there's a pathway forward out of this. And Dr. Spann, let me pitch that question to you first, because, we are, whether it's hyped up or whether it's reality or whether it's justified or it's not justified, there's a degree of fear that is gripping people. And I think somewhat unnecessarily, especially if you throw the faith component in there, that we need to be able to function as a society and move on and not be locked down by this thing. So let me ask you, Dr. Spann, first of all, to respond to that.
Well, Kim, I see 20 to 40 people a day, depending on the demand, and I interview people. I have patients in my practice who are anarchists, who are Black Lives Matter supporters, who are people who fly the rebel flag in the back of their truck proudly, community leaders, businessmen, CEOs, pastors. I have a ministry that I help and serve pastors from around the world, and with counseling and marital help. So I get to talk to a lot of people, and I've been interested, especially in country folks and people who have a low level of education, especially the patients that are over 65, because they're the ones most at risk. And here's the number one question that I get from all those groups, and that is, Dr. Spann, how do we learn to live with this? So just from the wisest man ever born of a human father, King Solomon said, there is no new thing under the sun. This is not unprecedented. We've had other illnesses before. I've said so many times on YouTube, and I've said it to you. The polio epidemic would rival this. I do think that the swine flu might have rivaled this. I do think this is a new virus, and we just don't know. And I think that's one of the battles that I've been so thankful for the ADH and the governor's office and how they've handled this. They're trying not to overshoot and overreach, but there is a tipping point, where if you don't distance yourself socially and wear masks and wash your hands and obey what the Scripture says, obey every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, for Christians or believers, you're doing harm. And we're supposed to be people out there considering the other fellow. Because we don't know, because there's number one, fear, there's number two, confusion. Number three, there's things that we've said and I've said that I've had to apologize for because we just don't know. The Surgeon General said things early on that he's had to go back and retract. So one of the enemies that we have is confusion and a lack of information. Now, I'll give you the other side of that. I have over 120 articles in my email in basket and 27 articles up on my computer that I have not had time to read this week about coronavirus. But I did read 2 or 3 this morning that bear on your point. One is, there is a cardiac disorder called Takotsubu's cardiomyopathy, and it's when someone's heart fails from fear. And that has increased significantly in cardiac hospitals in people who don't have coronavirus. So people are actually having coronary syndromes and cardiac syndromes because they are scared to death because of all the publicity and all of the sensationalism in the news. I've got an article up that concerns the challenge in estimating the total lives lost in COVID compared with the disease itself, from that compared with social isolation, depression, unemployment, and not going back to school. So you see this on all sides. But it is a daily issue with the patients that I have from 18 to 85. And I think people understand that if they're obese, pre-diabetic, diabetic, have lung disease, have heart disease over the age of 65, but especially over 80, they're at greater risk. So it's just a fear from confusion. And we don't have that 18 months of data and meta-analyses of all these studies, but it's getting better. So we're going to be able to start giving people better information. The way out of this is immunity. And that's going to be through vaccines, which there'll probably be only about 50% from the study I saw this morning because of all the anti-vaccine folks out there and because of those who are afraid to take the vaccine or think the government's going to put a chip in it or something foolish like that. You're going to have about 50%. So then we have then the other 20% that are going to need, or so, 10 to 20, they're going to need to become immune through the illness or recovery or some other means. We're going to have treatments. December, January, I fully expect phase 3 trials to be done on the mRNA 1273 from Moderna, and it looks like a great antiviral vaccine. So that's enough for me. I'd like to hear what Dr. Dillaha thinks about that one.
Dr. Dillaha, any comments?
Well, I'm also encouraged by the Moderna vaccine. And there's other vaccine candidates out there. I'm very heartened by the progress with the safety and efficacy studies. The government is really making these companies toe the line with regard to making sure that the vaccines are safe and effective, just like we would under any other circumstance with vaccines in the past when they were developed. The important difference here, and this is a huge risk that the investors are making, is that usually as a vaccine is going through its trials, the clinical studies, the vaccine manufacturer does not start manufacturing the vaccine until after the vaccine is approved by the FDA. What they're doing now is they're going ahead and making doses of the vaccine even before the vaccine is approved based on the safety and efficacy studies. This is a huge risk because they will have to throw all of that vaccine out if the vaccine studies show that the vaccine is not safe or does not work. So that is one way that as a country we're getting vaccine ready, so if the vaccine works, we're ready to go and people can get it right away. But it's a huge risk to investors because they could lose all of the money that they put into manufacturing the vaccine ahead of time if it has to be thrown out.
Kind of a risky question to answer, but I want to ask you anyway because I've already had people say something to me this week about it, and that is, are people going to be mandated to take the vaccine given the severity of COVID-19? Unlike the flu, that if you choose not to take the flu shot, you get the flu, and granted, you're going to pass it on to other people. But are there discussions in the medical world that this is one of those things that a vaccine, if found for COVID, or when, not if, when it is found for COVID-19, there are going to be attempts to make it mandatory?
I have not heard any discussions to this point in time about making it mandatory.
Okay. So as far as the pathway forward, let me shift and ask you this question. This is the other one I had for you. So one of the things is, like next week, I'm going to have Dr. Jensen on, and he has an impressive track record as a doctor. I've got a lot of doctor friends, and I talk to some of them. They say, we just need to learn to adapt and move on and quit spending all this money doing all this stuff and find the vaccine and deal with it and move on. And then I've got others that are, cheering the governor because he mandated the mask. And so we as lay people are caught in the middle of you medical folks that are back and forth. And I'm not saying that Dr. Span, you and Dr. Dillaha are at odds each other. I didn't mean to imply that. But how do we as the lay people know who to believe, and how do we as lay people know which report to take? Because since this has started, it's almost like a pancake flipping back and forth. Do you do this or do you not? And let me start this time, Dr. Dillaha.
Well, I think it's important for people to know the sources of the information that they consume. I encourage people to find a source of information that they feel is reliable and stick with it. I think when people internet surf or they get on social media and just dabble in all sorts of information, it can be very alarming to people because people put information out there and try to grab you with it so you'll be exposed to their ads. They're not really there to inform you or make sure you know what is the best information. So I encourage people to find a good source and stick with it. I like to think that I'm a good source of information and that Dr. Span is a good source. And we want people to know that we have their best interests at heart. It's hard to convince people of that, of course, if they're very suspicious or if they are worried or have a lot of fear. But, the important part, is to know that we in Arkansas have got to work together to make sure that we have good, reliable information out there so that people do know what to do. And it's a hard task to accomplish because there's a lot of misinformation out there also.
Dr. Span?
Well, I shared earlier how many articles I have on my desk. I have articles in paper print on my desk, Kim, and Dr. Dillaha gets the same articles. I'm looking forward to getting to know Dr. Chai, who is her data synthesis doc, because I want the best studies. But even within one journal, a great journal, you'll have articles that differ on whether it's spread by aerosols or not, and how many people are going to have immunity for longer, and what is the asymptomatic spread. I mean, I can show you everything from it's only 9% asymptomatic spread from the World Health Organization or less to 40%, to 60% in some cases. But what she said is true. Let me just say amen, because what she said is right. Even I have to limit my exposure. My concern is that people are getting their medical information, as I said to you last week, from breaking news. And you sure don't want to have CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News being the source that you use, because they want eyeballs. They want to sell ads. Everybody on the internet's worse than cable news. But I even have to limit mine to 3 or 4 major sources. But you're going to find different things. The idea is, Scripture says, let everything be confirmed in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. When you find 3 major sources, which I always tell my patients, look, You listen to the Arkansas Department of Health, then you check it with me to see if the common sense answer that I've synthesized is the same. And then you talk to someone who has your best interest at heart that's not medical, like your pastor. If you have 3 people that say the same thing, you got a pretty good answer, especially if it's confirmed by scientists who have a different, basically, worldview than you do. The problem we have out there is there's way too much suspicion and negativity and just rebelliousness in some that just, if the government says it, they just want to throw it out of hand. The Arkansas Department of Health and Governor Hutchinson and Nate Smith and Dr. Romero and Dr. Dillaha and Dr. Chai have one interest at heart, and that is your safety. They may have to go to the extreme because they're policymakers, but they're not going to put out anything. They don't want to ever have to retract anything, and they sure don't want anybody to die. Now, neither do I, but I'm an individual as well, and I don't make policy. So I would say you get your information from a very trustworthy source, and don't make it Twitter. Certainly don't make it Facebook. Don't make it any social feed where people have no accountability and have to have no discipline. And if they don't have a state license, I wouldn't listen to them. Okay? I'm curious what Dr. Dillaha thinks about that one.
Okay. Let me ask you, I need to ask Dr. Dillaha one question. And Dr. Dillaha, not to put you on the spot, but I've had several preachers reach out to me this past week, directly and indirectly, and they felt from some of their members that churches were being targeted. You throw on that the list that was released, which I don't remember. It may have been out there, and maybe I just missed it, but I don't see a list of the Walmarts where there were, employees identified or other private businesses, but the church list got put out there. And I need to hear, on behalf of my constituents and those that are listening, an explanation from the health department of the church list issue, and also just straight up, is the Department of Health or those that are working as contact tracers targeting churches as far as being a contributing source to the problem?
Well, I can tell you that we had identified some churches where transmission had taken place, and they were churches that really weren't following the recommendations. So our goal was to work with those churches to help them understand what the recommendations were and encourage them to follow them to prevent spread. So we did have a list of these churches, and the press learned about that list and requested it, and we felt that we didn't have any choice but to release it because they could have just FOI'd it. There wasn't a way that we could not release the list. And it gave us a lot of angst and heartburn to do it because we were not interested in calling out the churches. And we have people on our staff who take their faith really seriously and had been working with the churches and were very unhappy that it was released. And then we found that the articles were faulting us for releasing the list when we felt we didn't have a choice because it was requested by the media. So it put us in a very difficult situation, and we have been trying hard to regain the trust of the congregations that felt that they were unfairly highlighted. And we do want to work with churches to minimize the spread. We know that COVID-19 has occurred in churches and that church members have died of COVID-19 in Arkansas from catching it in churches. So we don't want that to happen. And we are not targeting churches any more than any other location. Of course, churches don't have the same mandate that, say, restaurants do, but we still want to work with them to make sure that they know the best practices and why things are recommended, and encourage them with the data that we have about churches that hasn't been published. So that's kind of a general synopsis of how things went around here.
Okay, let me give you a quick scenario. Then we've only got a couple minutes, and so at a church, if the people get out of the car and they're wearing masks and they walk through the congregation to their seats and they sit down, then are they under the guidelines? they are able to take the mask off at that time, participate in worship, and understand communion is a different environment. That's kind of a set-aside issue, but just the general worship. And then when they get ready to leave, they put the mask back on and wear the mask back to the car. Is that a safe enough practice for a congregation to utilize?
I would say with what we're learning about the virus being aerosolized, that I would encourage people in churches to wear the mask at all times, except when they're taking communion.
Yep.
We know that especially with singing is just extremely good at aerosolizing the virus. That, I would even discourage churches from singing. Have instrumental music or a singer, but that is separated from the rest of the congregation. But I think wearing masks in church is going to be very important.
I tell you what, I'll get you back on, not next week, because I got Dr. Jensen. We'll have a follow-up on that. One of the things, and I'm about out of time, I'm sorry, got to go, but one of the things is a little bit of conflicting information because we're told we can maintain 6 feet apart, it's okay. And I think that's something we got to work on is streamlining the information to be consistent so it doesn't send out mixed messages.
Right. Well, and it's not black and white. There's nothing magic about 6 feet,
All right. I got 1 minute. I got to give my sponsors a little credit. Dr. Spann, thanks for coming on. We'll get you back on in the future. Dr. Dillaha, thanks for coming on the Kim Hammer Show. It's Saturday. I appreciate y'all giving up your time. I only get an hour, but I appreciate you doing it.
You're welcome,
All right,
Kim.
this is Kim Hammer Show.
Doctor,